My style is always to be a lot more conversational. And I'm hoping that in today's conversation, we get to explore quite a bit with you, get to know you a little bit better, or get to have people get to know you a little bit better or in a different context. I am going to start, and as people come in, I'll be letting them in. Can you imagine? I'm sitting here and there's a storm raging, and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, this storm. I hope we can all hear each other clearly. I hope there's no blackouts. Let me speak positivity into this. Today is going to be an amazing session, and everything is going to go according to plan. Let me ground myself in that day, in that way. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Abaxoxi the Storytellers. The word Abaxoxi is derived loosely from the word kota, which is an Nguni word, which means to chat. We are hoping through these sessions to have a multicultural, intergenerational, multidisciplinary conversation with women leaders on the African continent. And the idea is to be able to curate stories and narratives that often do not get airtime. And these stories are being curated by women, for women, and actually, they're actually being curated for more than just women. They're being curated for the broader public to interact with. I was looking at a study recently, and it was talking about the number of contributors of thought leadership on reference sources such as Wikipedia. And I think the number of African contributors was less than 10%, and African women even less than that. And so the pertinence or relevance of having platforms where we share our own ideologies, philosophies, perspectives, and experiences has never been more relevant. And yes, I am speaking into a backdrop and a background of geopolitics today, which is looking at how the world has chosen to reference certain countries. And you know what I'm talking about, it's not the world. How certain countries and certain political leaders have taken the power of platform and been able to create and generate and perpetuate a particular narrative that is basically suiting their own agenda and not necessarily telling the whole truth about a perspective. It has never been more pertinent for African women to bring their voices into the room to be heard, and for our lens, our perspectives, our realities, and our truths to have a place to land and also a place for engagement. I'm hoping through these conversations that we create that safe space to have dialogue, conversations, explorations. It's not about framing a wrong or a right. It's rather about saying it is, normalizing traditional conversations that don't get airplay because they are not news, they are not headlines, they are not breaking. And in fact, typically, they're relational, things that we exist as and we actually we interact with on a daily basis. So in that introduction, it is so amazing for me to have a lineup of African women who are leaders in their own right. And when we look at the conversation of leadership, looking at a traditional construct that actually only considers the role that you play in a corporate organization that people interact with, the notion of leadership pertaining to a budget size organization type formal construct of organizing, which ascribes a particular title to people. And I think there's a lot more to that. And I think Thabisile is one of the ladies who has challenged me, because even as we were putting this together, with most of the ladies that we bring onto this conversation, often lead with the title because that's what people know, that's what people interact with. And she challenged me on her title, and you will see that her title is not the organizational construct that she belongs to. She actually leads with the notion of mother. And I thought, what a beautiful grounding and what a beautiful way to introduce a phenomenal woman. My personal introduction and experience of Thabisile was primarily through a TEDx talk. And I recall sitting in the background, hearing a coaching session and thinking, what a poised, what a gentle, what a powerful message, which actually reminded me about the power of African women, which is not necessarily to be loud and to be the most heard, but to be gentle and deliberate in their interactions with people in a way that makes them unmissable. And hearing the TEDx talk on stage, I remember thinking to myself, damn, this woman is a thing. She's a force. And a force in the sense that she spoke to my soul. She spoke to the inner workings of my mind and gave it legitimacy to exist, given the spaces that she's been able to occupy. Ladies and gentlemen, listening to this particular session of Abaxoxi the Storytellers, it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's storyteller, Thabisile Phumo. Welcome, Thabisile, welcome.
Good evening, and thank you to you for the invitation, and thank you to everybody who's joining us today. Thank you for that edifying introduction as well. I do appreciate.
Listen, you are nothing short of phenomenal. I don't think, not, I was going to say, I don't think you appreciate. And maybe you wouldn't appreciate because I think the gift and the pleasure of a person is not in the person giving, it's in the recipients and how they've been able to translate it. You remind me of a lecturer of mine, and I was that student. I dyed my hair orange in university or something peculiar like that. And I walked into the lecture room and the lecturer said to me, he pulled me aside and says, Rehema, what's this all about? And I'm thinking, I like it. I like it. But his message to me was that, yeah, you like it. You get to see it 5 minutes in the morning in front of the mirror. We get to see the whole day. And that message stood with me because I think when I'm translating the impact that you have, you probably interact with yourself and your thoughts and ideas a portion of the time. But those ideas, the way that you think, the spaces that you create and curate, stay with us for a lot longer. And it's in that context that I do edify you, that I do raise you up, and I do honor and amplify the impact that you have in not just your gentility, your approach, but also in your professional journey that you've walked in the spaces that you've been able to occupy and open up and create a lens and stamp and perspective that's distinctly authentic and distinctly rooted in the value system that you have, but also the value system that speaks more to a social cultural context. So I think that's a beautiful segue to the conversation I'm hoping to have with you and the framing of this conversation, which really has been for me to explore with African women leaders, particularly this role of narrative, the role of stories as a construct that have defined and shaped who we are, how we interact with the world. So I can sit and I will edify you. But I would like for you to run with this conversation and for me to be a humble audience member and getting to know you from using the context and using the grounding of a story as the backdrop, getting to the essence of the stories that shaped you, the stories that you heard when you were growing up, the stories that made you think the way that you do, that influenced your thinking. We'd like to say to take that and build that into how that shifted and changed the stories that you decided to tell yourself, the stories that played out, the stories or narratives that you are choosing to edify, given the responsibility, the positions that you have, and the roles that you play. And it's not for you to give it to us in a linear way. It's for you to take hold of the narrative and share with us. Thabisile, what's the role of stories in your world? What are the stories that you tell? Why are you telling them? Who do you tell them to? And start with telling us why you're starting your narrative or your introduction to the world as mother.
I think mother is a very nurturing term, both from a biological perspective, in that it symbolizes being able to give birth to something, life to something. So I use it both literally and figuratively in describing myself, because it is the narrative that carries me through, that indicates to me that whatever you imagine, you can birth, you can mother, you can bring to life. And so that's a very core internal narrative that I tell myself as a mother, but it also comes from the fact that I come from a generation of many women, and I call it many women in the sense that the men in my family, either through death or through them being handsome men, never got to stay around long enough for them to make a significant impact in our lives. So I come from a lineage of very strong women who self-identified, who embraced being women, but I have this anomaly in this narrative, in that when I was born, my father was expecting a son. And he tells a story that my father is a soccer fanatic, that he ran from the stadium as my mother was about to give birth, arrived there anticipating yet another Skara Sono type person. And when I came out, he tells me the story to this day. He was extremely disappointed. But then he made up his mind that he would raise me as a boy anyway, albeit I was a girl. And that was a big thing in my growing up, in that I grew up while I grew up in this very powerful female energy, but I also grew up outside these boundaries, because I had this father who didn't want to recognize me as a woman for a long time, took me to soccer games. And for those who have seen my writing, I do know how to use an okapi, because that was part of how boys were raised. And what that has done, it has removed the element of fear in my storytelling. And now, if I weave it back to mother, to give birth to someone, to carry someone in your body for 9 months or however long, that tells you that you're not afraid. But to birth them out safely and undergo that process, which damages you internally and externally sometimes, tells of a story of people who are born mothers without fear. It is how society then removes that layer from us and removes that innate feeling of not being afraid, and begin to put in this societal barriers or societal narratives that bring back this big fence of fear. And you are finding that as women, and myself in particular, we are very fearless in our own private spaces, but extremely fearful when we go out to society, because we have these narratives that are almost counterproductive, in a sense that you are strong, you are fearless, you are beautiful. But when you get there, the standards and the determinants of society are pushing against that self-taught narrative of fearlessness of mothers.
Thabisile, you are stirring the pot. You're stirring the pot in the sense that I think there's the first acknowledgement that there is a difference in terms of how we're socialized as men and as women, as a point of departure, and that in terms of society, there's an expectation of what that looks like. And in families, it's played a big role in terms of what women and men are exposed to. And so when we speak of a dispensation in 2025, I think there's an appreciation that there's a social construct that actually has got that appreciates the difference between a girl and a boy, and a girl child and a boy child, and therefore those exposures and those lens that we've applied to what is acceptable, what you're exposed to, shape the kind of environments that you are playing in. And I think it's always powerful to frame a context, a contextual setting that says this is the landscape, and it's not about assigning blame, rightness, or wrongness, and saying this is what it is. I think what you sit on as well is this beautiful power of privilege of saying, I picked up skills and competencies that allow me to engage in a world that was geared towards a particular, or not necessarily geared, that I lived in a world that appreciates certain skills. I mean, the Okapi thing you've got to show me. I think there's a particular way of handling that thing that demonstrates whether you're within or without. And so that's an after hours conversation I'm hoping to have with you. And it's purely for self-defense purposes. But what you're framing for us, and you bring to the conversation beautifully, I think, is this notion of the power that we have associated mentally, socially, and just in terms of society that we associate with men exists. It exists differently, but it also exists with women. And therefore, the title of mother is not less superior. It's not less significant. It is equally powerful, just different. I love that, because I think we are often having conversations that put us at contrasting poles of men, women, bad, right, good, right. I must be like this together. And you're saying the difference is actually the sweet spot, because I bring forth in the journey of motherhood its significance and the role that it's played for me personally, having lived in a world that acknowledges how the differences are, having dabbled with privilege in that space. Let me elevate that, and let's start elevating it. And in that relationship with that role, I can also present to other people a different narrative to engage with, right? Am I hearing you correctly? That's how I've interpreted what you said. And that's, I guess for me, I'm sitting with beautiful butterfly bubbles in my stomach. Did I hear you right?
Yeah, you're hearing me right. And I think the anxiety for women to want to be, can I call it, on the same par with men, is a very debilitating anxiety. I think what we should be looking for is fairness and equity, in that we get the same opportunities, we are accorded the same respect. But in reality, we should begin to sit with the beauty of the difference of not being a male and not wanting to be male at all. But I guess I can also put that into the pot, because part of my journey is I went to a convent, a convent ran by Belgian nuns. So for 5 years, I lived in a world where, in my formative years, high school in particular, where I didn't know what it was like to compete with men, where I didn't know what it was like to not be equal to men, because this was a female-run convent. We were cloistered in the middle of nowhere. We produced our own food. When we were talking about academic prowess, it was women against women. So it is only when I arrived back at varsity that I realized, oh, you compete with males. But that became very relevant for me, because I had kind of missed a whole 5-6 years of competing with another gender. So it is not even part of my reality. And as a result, I may have the unfortunate reality where when women struggle with men are better, men are more competent, it wasn't part of my framing until my last day at high school, where I knew women were powerful. I knew women were smart, and that got validated throughout my teen years. And so as I arrived into the world, I didn't struggle because I also didn't feel the need to be like a man, because I didn't live in their reality in that cloister space, in a sense that, I mean, and I give an example, some of the things I've done in those years, helping a cow give birth. I mean, this is a female world, right? We did everything ourselves. We planted our own food. We had sheep, goat, hares, you can name it. And so the reality that I'm probably coming out of has probably been a bit more forgiving for me in terms of how I relate to genders, remembering the fact that I was raised as a boy and then taken to a all-girls convent. And so being able to have the best of all of those worlds, and being able to not feel like someone is better than, but my cry always is fairness, equal opportunities. That's all we want. And in fact, I'm that advocate that says, I do not believe women need empowerment. I think it's a cop-out when people are putting barriers for opportunity. Women already come empowered. What women need are opportunities for further development, opportunities to prove themselves in the various spaces. But this women empowerment thing is something I do not relate to, because it almost feels like you need to elevate women to a status where they be like males. That is not my agenda. Women must be like women. Women must harness how women are, but they should not be facing the unnecessary socio-cultural, socio-political, and even corporate or organizational barriers that they face on the basis that they are female. And again, most companies will then put this lens where they say, oh, let's create a women's program, let's empower women, yet males who are far less qualified, who are far less competent, are not subjected to those. And when I'm being facetious, on a good day, I say, I studied at a university where they didn't split us on sexual, and so a BCom degree, and at the right until graduation, the male child and the boy and the female child have got exactly the same training, exactly the same competencies. Why then, when they enter into organizations or into society, do we then begin to see those social or cultural barriers? It's a man-made system of exclusion that you can liken to what we've done with race, that you can liken with what we've done with the caste system in other countries.
Yeah. And my yours are always with, because you've linked so many dots that perhaps I've either seen or are just raised to my consciousness in this conversation. Going back to man-made, the idea that your dad had wanted a boy child, and it meant something, meant that it didn't mean that he would not treat you as a boy. So that the context that you grew up in was this assignation of roles is subjective. It's very subjective. It's not concrete. And I guess what you're speaking to is the power and agency of individuals to define how they're going to interact with that. So while society might have a norm that they have socialized and normalized, individuals still have the power to translate that. That's the first thing this part of the conversation is elevating for me. And therefore, in your interpretation of roles, what I'm hearing is that then roles become something that you own, and something that you define, as opposed to walking with the norms that come in. Building on this notion of roles, I guess it speaks to a level of, when one starts to interrogate, then why do these roles exist? It speaks to a level of comfort, and it also speaks to a level of, I guess, the benefits and rewards of privilege, of exclusion, that allow us to other. And those levels of exclusion become not so much that it has been a male-female issue, but because power has been assigned to certain elements of society, and there's a vested interest in maintaining and retaining that power. And I love the fact that you bring in politics, because we are seeing that play out right now globally, on the global landscape, that once power has been enjoyed by a particular grouping, for whatever reason that historically has allowed that to form, it is the preservation of power. It is the preservation of the assignation of that we will ensure that nothing changes, because that's a threat, right? Darwin's theory of evolution. Going back to the most basic and sitting back and say, well, if I allow narratives or alternative narratives to coexist, that means this narrative that allows me to enjoy benefits is actually going to go away. That speaks to more our humanity and how we interact with the world and ourselves. It starts asking us the questions of, and it's not really about morality, it's really about self-preservation, right? I'm hearing narratives really being, I'm hearing the use of narratives in your world have really been about appreciating how people engage and self-preserve. And that engagement being useful. And so bringing in the narrative of fairness, that's a value statement, right? What is fair? What is just? What is fair? And whilst as society we can ascribe certain parameters and propositions that give the idea of fair, that's going to always also be subjective. Geez, you are challenging me to this idea of consciousness, self-consciousness, because then what you're saying is none of these things are, not what you're saying, what I'm interpreting is none of these things are cast in stone, and there's a high level of personal responsibility. And I'm hearing that the influence of lived narratives, in the sense that your life is a lived narrative, or a lived experience which is valid. And I don't think we do enough to capture these different lens and perspective that allows us to enjoy this kind of conversation. So the lived narrative, which was evidenced by how your parents chose to live their life, has influenced how you see things. And that seeing things allows you to either accommodate or reject certain perspectives, but it's also about your own preservation of what is right, just, fair, and palatable at that point in time. And so you're making me wonder, because I have been wondering around this idea of, to what extent do the narratives that we grow up with shape how we see the world? And I'm hearing more and more with more interactions that I have with people, with organizations, with groups, that they shape us. I want to understand then that in as much as they shape our thinking, they shape our logic framing, they shape our sense making. In as much as that was an influence, I think there's a limitation of that. And I think when you speak to people in the fields of science and they talk about brain's development, and I think neuroscientists about the development phase, and when, certain things are embedded in how you do things, there's a point in time where that, the knowledge and the constructs that you grow up with shift, and you go into adulthood and you're faced with realities. So what did the world tell you in reality versus what you are framing? So it kind of seems like it's beautiful, but kind of utopic in a world that forces and challenges common thinking, similar thinking, and not disregards, but it rejects and penalizes alternative views. What's your interaction with the reality of who you are today in those narratives, and how do those coexist?
Look, I think it's firstly, at what point in your growth do you own your own narratives? And when you step out of the, can I call it the general narratives, which are supported by society, which are lauded by society, and those are the common narratives that get highlighted in social media, they get celebrated everywhere, and sometimes by through unwitting collusion. And here I'm talking about women, indoctrination, even co-conspiracy. Women tend to perpetuate these very same narratives that we are trying to repel. And so if you then decide to kind of stop, appreciate what your formative narratives were about, challenge them, cast out those that are not useful for you, move with those that are useful for you, and reshape your own personal narratives, you have to appreciate that you are going to pay a huge price for it. And that huge price, in a lot of instances, is isolation. Sometimes it can damage your own reputation, and you've got to do a cost-benefit analysis, if I call it that. What is the cost of you owning the narrative versus what I would call the temporary punitive measures that society puts on you? Because at some point, you know, people can badmouth you, people can isolate you, but they're gonna move on. You're not gonna be on the front page of that story forever. And if you are willing to have that temporary pain so that you can redefine how you want to see yourself, how you want the world to see you, because you probably want to do that, and that is my advocacy, because you are building the generation that comes after you. So the responsibility of cleaning up narratives that are not progressive for your own generation, whatever they look like, far outweighs the price you have to pay for the generations that are sitting with you and behind you. And for me, that's the challenge I say as women we face. The price we pay is painful, but I think in the many times that I've kind of ventured out into paying that price, it has paid off. And that is why I started talking about the element of fear. A lot of us are living our best lives within our heads, within our souls, within our hearts. But the fear of going to show society what we are like, what we are about, is what is preventing us from showing up the way we want to show up. Because as I sit here, I've got no need to be like any guy. I don't want to be equal to any man. I just want to be given enough opportunities to transact in this world in the best way I know how. And there's no allure or appeal to show up in that context as a man for me. And that is the narrative that I'm writing for myself. And because I'm a mother of daughters, I'm hoping that my children, for my great-grandchildren, redefine that story that says, yes, you find a cruel world, you find the world that doesn't allow you to live the way you best should because of the many barriers, but that doesn't stop you from crafting this micro existence that take you to your best level of joy, to your best level of actualization. And it may not be visible to the outside world, right? You could be standing on your own podium. And how many women are allowing themselves to stand alone and become number one, number two, and number three in your own podium without an audience in the room? Because therein lies the wayfarers in terms of resetting the narratives. Because our hunger to be acknowledged, our hunger to be part of the most, is what is depriving us from actually telling our own authentic stories that are saying, we may not want what you want. We actually may be living in Johannesburg, but we do not want to live as fast as the Johannesburg people are living, because that doesn't resonate with who you are. It is a different story within a context that is fast-paced. And why not be slow when other people are running? Because your destination and their destination is not the same. And I think that is the same concept that I bring into formulating your own personal narratives.
Thabisile, that sounds amazing, but so simplistic, because I'm sitting and I'm listening in about the power of narrative, and being an outlier is costly.
Yes.
Being an
Extremely.
it's extremely costly in an era where and rooted obviously in the fear of exclusion, fear of and sometimes it goes to the extent of sustenance. I mean, I've worked with women leaders over the years, and part of the reason of maintaining a narrative and perpetuating a narrative is because it's easier, and most other genders don't have to navigate that tightrope of providing an alternative narrative. Because as I started off with, there's a narrative that exists. There's a narrative that plays out that has been convenient, that is actually financed, it's resourced, right? And being the one who wants to suggest an alternative narrative, you bear a price. You bear the brunt. You are outcast, you are labeled. I remember when people would say you're a feminist, I used to think, why is feminist a swear word? Like, why is this articulation of a just and fair environment that supports and enforces and facilitates equal access? Why must that be a fight? And the reality is that some of the privileges that you are able to sit at and with today and being able to craft and share that story must have come not just at a price, but there must have been a certain level of buying into the current hype. How do you exist in an environment that understands one narrative without existing in that environment? You can't exist in a divorced, and because you're put outside, you are and you use the word advocate, that has got such negative connotations, particularly I think for me, for feminist activists, right? We can talk about advocate, and once you're in the policy environment and you're talking about everything else, then you are a lobbyist. Then you've got these beautiful terms that are associated with not just grandeur, but they're experienced as being palatable. As soon as you're using those words when it comes to a woman, then you are a disruptor, you're a troublemaker, you're a noisemaker. In fact, and you shouldn't be earning a lot of money because now you speak for all the women. You're no longer allowed to have a voice that is independent. And that's the privilege you're sitting on, saying that whilst I'm in Joburg, I don't want to be fast-paced, etc. And I'm watching a lot more young women leaders, in terms of the articulation of their voice and narrative, are perpetuating this very environment that some of us are sitting back and saying, that's crazy, that's not sustainable, that's harmful, that's detrimental to your health, it's detrimental to your family construct, it's detrimental to all the things that make sense, because you are onboarding all these things that are just not constructive for human existence on a sustained level, at that pace. And so what obviously a particular I would say cohort of women subscribe and buy into it, that's fine. But there's another that are believing, because this is the narrative that we end up, what we see ends up being our truth, right? That's perpetuating that. Is it not sitting on a particular level of privilege to be able to divorce yourself? What allows you to divorce yourself from the rat race, which gets you recognized? So if and you talked about, not being the noisemaker. If a woman is silent and and she's quietly doing and diligently doing enough, chances are she's not going to open the doors that need to open, have access, the very thing that you're speaking about. And that access ends up with a real financial, economic implication. And I think we must never leave out economics from the conversations that we're having around narrative and how they shape where we are, and particularly where it comes to women. If those implications of standing away from an existing and prevailing narrative and providing a new narrative has got consequences such as economic, how can you afford to? Is it not sitting with privilege, being able to reshape that? What allows you to do that? With peace, with comfort, with security of the basic constructs of livelihood.
Look, I think for me, two things, and you learn that over the years, right? The first one is mental health. A lot more women have sacrificed where they are, what they've achieved, have sacrificed, have actually put their mental health on the cross. To an extent that when you look at it in the long term, you get all these privileges, you get all these laws, these doors open. And just when you are supposed to run through the ribbon as you finish your race, your mental health catches up with you. So you have to appreciate, and in my mind, there are two things, and this is where I would like to bring God into this conversation. My favorite scripture is, I knew you before you were born. That who you will be is predestined, right? Which means where everyone is sitting at this point in time is not governed by the constructs and the society where that journey finds itself. So and I look at my career and the fights that I've had and where I've arrived, and I'm beginning to say, even if I hadn't fought, even if I didn't kick the doors, because my destiny was predestined, God knew that I would be there when I would be. He would have enabled me to
How,
get.
Thabisile? How? You are in the middle of it, and you are believing that.
And I'm believing that because I come with the scratches of the kicking of the doors. And I now am very clear in my mind that unless and until your journey is God ordained, He will take you where favor will take you where it is not logical for you to be there. However, the journey towards that favor, the journey towards God taking you there, will be as difficult as it was for Joseph to become the governor of Egypt. You are going to have to be in the pit. You are going to have to be sold out. You are going to be arrested. And the journey of the many women who've succeeded have got a similar pattern where they were sabotaged, where they were kicked out of a job because of this or that. But ultimately, they ended up where they were supposed to end up. So I've got to believe that.
Your sound is going away.
I don't know if you can hear me now. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. It was just a bit low. Yeah.
Have to believe, despite
It's a bit low.
those circumstances, that you're going to get there anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it sounds philosophical, but at my age, I can tell you that that is the recipe to get there. You can't do it without it. I talk to Black people all the time. I said, even if you believe Gumkize, which is our traditional ways of spirituality, you know, and I grew up next to people who did that, and they had in Zulu they call it ukuchela, where they will go and get water and then sprinkle it around the yard. And I would remember when that had happened, you would see the bravado of that family saying, "Yabona, now that we've done this, we know that they've protected and will be successful because we've done all the rituals that enable us to get there. What is missing is our effort." Similarly, if you put it in the Christian context, God has predestined you to be there. Your destiny is secured. All that will be missing, if you believe and you believe wholeheartedly, is your effort to get there. But you have to, and I talked about the price earlier, you have to appreciate like you're going to be in the pit. The road is not going to be a straight line. But as I said, if you believe that conforming is a cheaper price, you will then meet the real price of that conforming at the end of your glorious years, when your mind and your heart and your soul are so incongruent that they begin to take away your personal gains. That is why sometimes you find in people who have got lots of money, lots of success, but there's a lot of emptiness. It's because that sacrifice that they made in the beginning, unfortunately, comes to cash in at the end of that career, where they have the money, they've got the recognition, but there's just emptiness, in a sense that they enjoy nothing, they are not fulfilled by anything that comes out of that journey. That said, I'm not trying to simplify the challenges we face in life, but I'm saying you have to punch within your boxing weight, right? If you're a bantamweight or a flyweight or a heavyweight, you got to know how to punch at each level of your weight within your life. So at some point, you're going to have the mental and the emotional strength of a flyweight. At that point, Rehema, fine, have the doors open on your behalf and conform. But as you begin to learn how to have more stamina. When you get to heavy flyweight, bantamweight, you have strengthened yourself and you have fortified yourself to be able to know that you are good enough to be where you are supposed to be. You are good enough to actually allow the universe to usher you into your real space. And when you get to heavyweight, which is this privilege that you're talking about, already at this point, at your heavyweight level, people who think you are a good fighter are right. People who think you are a bad fighter are right. And both of them at that point matter not. So long as you, the boxer, appreciate your abilities of knowing how to fight. So in my mind, all wars end in peace. Women have spent so much. In fact, this year we are reviewing the Beijing Platform for Action 30 years later. We have spent so many years fighting this thing. Surely, as Einstein says, trying to do this over and over again and expecting different results is not going to take us there. Perhaps this isolated path, this different path, the more women are getting on this dirt road, if I call it that, that dirt road at some point will be rebuilt into becoming a paved road because there'll be a critical mass on it. But as I said earlier, women collude, women are called conspirators to keep in the status quo because it's comfortable. But we have to have the courage to call more women out, to redefine their own narratives. It's not going to be a mass exodus, but we have enough early adopters to begin to shine a spotlight to those early adopters so that the critical mass can slowly move into this path of women redefining their own narratives. And I think for me, I'm not a feminist. And in my mind, and feminism is, I'm not anti-feminism, but I'm almost saying you can still wear your bra, but still be in a situation where you're comfortable in any space, despite how tight your bra is, right? And that is something that we need to begin to be comfortable as women. This agenda of equal to men, being like men, wanting to take up what men are having, we are convincing ourselves that men are sitting there not fortifying their privilege, not fortifying the status quo, and also not using the very same women who are in the same course with us to gatekeep this status quo. So they've gotten the formula right. I mean, if you look at what happened with race, you had Black people supporting it. What happened to slavery in West Africa? It was Black people recruiting Black people into slavery. And in this day and age, because we are so preoccupied with this anti-men agenda, instead of a pro-women lobbyist agenda, we are not looking at the fact that men are doing exactly what has been done and has worked for them since time immemorial. For you to catch a fish, you have to use a fish bait to be able to do that, or a worm that the fish is familiar with. And so women are being recruited to continuously create these fences because there's a scarcity mindset where they'll drip feed a few of us with these privileges and opportunity, and then tell us how scarce this is and ask us to help them preserve so that not more women can come into that space. So in my mind, that is why I'm saying, let's rewrite the narrative. Let's stop. And this I learned when I spent some time in Israel, where I had a very poignant comment in one of the museum of the Holocaust, at the Holocaust Museum, where they were like asking, because of what was happening, why did the Jews not try to fight against the Germans? And the answer, which has never left me, is it made more sense to save the Jews than to fight the Germans. So in my mind, and I'm introducing a very idealistic narrative that at some point it must start making more sense as women to save more women than try to fight against men in attaining the society that we so aspire, bearing in mind that the world has more women than men. And it's not about this or that. It is an existence of men and women in a context that all live our lives in a fulfilled way.
I found myself agreeing with you, disagreeing with you, agreeing with you, disagreeing with you, going back and forth. and starting, I guess, with the notion around a faith. And initially what it sounded like to me is like just asking for blind faith. That's a lot. That's a lot when you're working with the realities of existence and the pressures of basic survival sometimes, where it comes down to. But I like about what you were saying, what I interpreted from what you're saying, though, it's beyond faith. It's having a point of departure about the reality you'd like to see. So bringing in, I think, the kind of practices that we've had, particularly as Africans, that strengthen us. And I think it's really, you talked about mental health. What are we doing to strengthen our core? And in strengthening our core, we have a sense of resilience around the things that we're going to go through, because what you're framing is, if I interpret it, is, I'm hearing say the world is not fair. The constructs we're going to come across are not fair. Going back to the previous example, they exist because they service an agenda. Having said that, it is not that, and this is more around your later statements around men, women, fight, not fight. I think that part of the conversations are really about framing a fight that perhaps doesn't exist, a societal construct that has morphed and emerged and has been resilient because of what it services and how it services, rather than a deliberate malicious effort to put down. And sometimes things don't change, not because there's no desire for change, but rather because there is no voice and face of change. And the more the argument comes into the system about what is not right with the system, the focus becomes on the fight around the system. And I'm hearing you say from your conversation, from what you're sharing, is that there's a greater opportunity and latitude around what is currently shaping feminist organizing. And not being a feminist, but I think the ideas that you espouse speak to what actually feminism is, which is not necessarily about burning the bra. But I think that the focus has been so much around the just society. And I think that the wording and the languaging of that is problematic in and of itself sometimes, because it speaks to what is not there, right? And therefore, the effort and the attention, which is why we're not seeing changes, because it's emphasizing it is not right, it is not fair, it is not just. There is a great opportunity right now in our languaging, and here's where I'm hearing your call for subscription to defining new narratives, to onboard new narratives, to create space and have trailblazers walking this narrative and evidencing for us the alternative way of engaging, is to frame a possibility of this is the truth I'd like to see, as opposed to measuring. And I guess for me, this is also sometimes a problem. The measurement of women's success always in context of the other gender is problematic, because it doesn't frame a reality that we've constructed for ourselves. I think for me, the first challenge I had, and to use your power of anecdotes, was doing my master's. One of the things that you have to do is a dissertation, and my dissertation had to be on storytelling by African. It was initially an organization, and it changed to African women in business. And finding frames of reference for that was almost impossible. And therefore, you're coming across a society that says, for you to have this conversation, you need to have a peer review article. You need to have somebody who's said and done it before. And we're often creating constructs about women against realities that exist, which is not conducive, because that disempowers the system and the environment from saying that in the absence of this, what does it exist? What does it look like? How do we frame that? And that allows us to build new vocabulary, language, lexicon, and ways of engaging with that truth. And perhaps, and I would agree with you, my personal lamentation, I've been saying to everybody, like, yo, some of these feminist argument conversations have actually created a lag in the system, personal view, a very big lag in the system, because the conversations have stayed stagnated on what isn't and how it isn't. And whilst there is merit and value in stating the status quo, it hasn't given enough time and innovation for curating alternative perspectives and engaging and interacting with that. In fact, we give so little time to new ways of thinking, because we keep trying to box it in the context of old thinking, in the context of thinking that's already designed for an alternative model. The time for modeling is now. The time for reframing narratives, which only happens by living new realities, living and taking on the power. What you're giving permission for in your discussion, and I loved I don't understand boxing. I think it's so violent, and I want to but when you started saying lightweight, bantam, and featherweight, what did you say? Featherweight, bantam, and heavyweight. I actually understood it immediately. I was like, oh, okay, that's what she means. But the power of narrative allows us to frame a language around seeing this. So here's the invitation that I'm hearing from this. I'm hearing a statement, but also an invitation. The invitation is one born of perspective, and you're giving us the power of hindsight, your personal journey as the construct, right? So your hindsight is saying that if I was to take from scripture, it doesn't matter what I did, my journey was ordained, right? And if my journey was ordained, the fights and battles that I have, sometimes I was fighting the wrong battle, because whether or not I did anything, in the way that things work out, and looking at passage of time and how human behavior and social environments actually navigate change by different influences, certain things were bound to happen, and therefore don't fight. That is such a powerful statement to land, and I wish I had heard that 20 years ago, starting my career, because one goes in with this perspective of what do I need to change, what needs to happen, and without the freedom on peace and saying, that's how it works, how do I become authentically me? How do I live into this space? And whilst the system might reject, the system might not understand, it's actually not understanding a lot more than just me. And I can't make it about the system not working with me, the system not understanding me and not accepting me. The system doesn't understand things it doesn't understand. And all of us, if we were to be data sets, and you use the talk, the narrative around micro ecosystems, if all of us are data sets in these micro ecosystems, collectively, we are significant data. And I think the challenge and the invitation I'm hearing you giving out to women around narrative sharing and framing their realities and perspectives allows us to collect those data sets. And rather than sitting from a point of departure that is using historical, empirical data around what wasn't working, how are we using the same time, same effort, same reference point, same resources to start putting in the narrative and inferences that speak to current realities? We have moved, we have shifted, we've changed. There's been battles that have been won, but there are new ways of engaging. And I think that when we look at some of the data points that have shifted, that's great. What are the data points we're not paying attention to is what I'm hearing. What are the data sets that are actually a bit more meaningful? What are the data sets that we should be elevating? And we're being distracted by just participating in data sets that no longer serve us. If we're to create women-owned, if that is even a thing that we should be doing, what are the new data sets that, if we are not looking at creating a divisive reality, that incorporates the new reality that we want to do? And I think that's a beautiful invitation for women and anybody who's an advocate for just and fair environments to sit back and say, if the old data sets exist, we take that. How do we onboard new data sets, and how do we create a groundswell and a following and a fellowship around the new data sets? How do we give those life? And you're saying that in your journey, playing at heavyweight, you're saying that's where the goal is. That's where the opportunity is. That's where the invitation lies. So narrative will be narrative, and we can either sit with Hansel and Gretel, and that becomes the only thing that we tell people, or we start telling the stories of Tato and Litsima and Tebogo, and those start influencing the data sets that become the point of engagement. But until we put them in the pot, we can't engage. And I think the quote that I saw from DeepSeek, because you put in all these data sets, and DeepSeek is for me right now better than ChatGPT. And DeepSeek started saying that, if we talk about artificial intelligence and the ability to mine big data, it can only mine what exists. And that for me this week has been my drop in the pin that dropped. We can only interact with information and data that exists. And for as long as we sit and perpetuate existing data and focus on that, that becomes the only data set. And the opportunity for us as storytellers, as leaders, is to start bringing in new data sets, new points of interaction. And it's not right or wrong. It's interference in the system. And with significant points of interference, starts becoming a groundswell of truth, possibility, and reality. Did I hear you?
Yeah, and I think there are two things I want to emphasize on that. Firstly, you can only change what you have the capability to sustain, right? So even when you write your own stories and you are rewriting your own narrative, you need to understand that you cannot swim the ocean in one breath.
Oh.
And that is why I talk about the different phases of boxing, because that's my favorite sport. So that's the first one. But the second one, what you know, what you were told, even about you, is a baseline. You have the responsibility to either amend or augment or change that baseline for yourself. Now, it is easy to retain the status quo of the baseline of that narrative about yourself and about your existence. It is okay, because some of us want to go through life coasting, right? And on cruise control. And it's not a right or wrong thing. So some of us just don't have the appetite for the stress that comes with changing or moving out of sync. And we should be able to allow those people to continue, particularly women, to continue to do that. But we also need to open up space for those women who want to rewrite narratives, who want to be the ones that pay the price and become the sacrificial land for the new path. For them to be able to do that, because what is nice about it, and I use the narrative all the time, that says everybody's on the highway. If we begin to tell these narratives on the side dirt roads, what is definitely going to happen is that road is going to be used so many times, it's going to define a path. And that path, at some point, when there's a big accident on the highway, which always happens, people are, and that is where I talk about the destiny. People are one day going to be so stuck on the highway, they're going to off-ramp to that path. And hopefully when that happens, they must find a critical mass of women who are wayfarers, who have rewritten the narrative. And remember, we are not rewriting it for those who came before us. We also somehow need to accept that those who are with us are not even going to understand it. But we are writing it for those who come after us, and the courage to be able to start that. It's not even about whether we succeed or not. It is about the fact that we started, and even if we walk half a mile in that journey, we have to believe that that generation, when it comes, will pick up from that half a mile journey and carry it forward until the next generation. Because you must remember that once upon a time, there was no patriarchy. Somebody walked a mile in patriarchy and other people stretched it. So in the same way, if we want to change the narrative about women, some women must help us by walking half a mile. Hopefully 6 generations from now, we will be talking about once upon a time where unequal society, but there was this cohort of people who changed that narrative. And in the same way, where you look at invention, I come from an era of a fax machine where everybody thought that was the best thing since sliced bread. And then the next thing, we had Skype, and today we are Zooming, and nobody knows what a fax machine looks like. And that gives me hope that if women began to have the courage and lose the fear of standing up to their own name, standing up to their own role, and saying, here was a Thabisile who was like this. It may not have been mainstream, it may not have been celebrated, but when it came to congruency in who I was, how I acted, and how I interacted with the world, at least one day when my kids throw their last sand in my grave, I know that I was true to the existence that God brought me here for. It's a higher purpose calling rather than an activist calling for women to try change the narrative.
Thabisile, you are a gift, a treasure, and a pleasure. And I can see this is a conversation I am going to continue having with you on the sidelines as you drop pearls of wisdom, lens and perspective, and I think many points of engagement as well as invitations. And I think the framing of it as not as absolute, but a perspective allows us to bring into the room many perspectives. And I think that enrichment of perspectives allows us, as you say, to have paths that we can choose to follow. And whichever path resonates, or whichever path provides you with a certain sense of comfort of your direction, born of the path and the destiny you were meant to walk. I think I will even expand what you're saying from a, I think I've spent a lot of time saying I'm doing it for this other person and that other person. I'm going back to mental health as being also a very personal journey for me, appreciating the ability for me to say I'm doing it for me, because this is my path, my destiny. I cannot control how the rest of the generations come on board. So I'm really loving your idea of a path, and is to walk your path, walk it true. Be so comfortable in how you're walking it, that the other stuff that comes in are distractions. Go for that spiritual cleansing that gives you the strength and the power to walk in that power and truth, and understand that you will have people who subscribe, you'll have people who walk away, but walk in that truth. There is validity in that. There is merit and there's greater strength in the ability to not just sustain it, because you did bring sustainability into the conversation, not only sustain it, but to enjoy it. There's no point in walking a path of pain to actually feel like you're going to have pleasure at some other point in life. I think life is for living today. Let's tell our stories, let's tell them authentically, and let's not be afraid of the repercussions, because so what? The repercussions come and they go, but you are still the architect of your life. Thank you so much for joining me. I can't believe it's been an hour. I am going to open the floor very briefly. We spoke so much, I didn't even have time to invite some of the audience if they would like. And this is the point where I say, if you would like to bring your voice into the room, have a question for myself or Thabisile, I am welcoming you to share. I see a mic on. I'm not sure if that's because you'd like to speak. If you would please also bring on your camera that allows you us to see you and engage with you. Thabisile, I see your mic on. Would you be coming on and speaking? Or is that just a legacy mic that is on? Thabisile, now I can speak with you for a very long time. And I know that many people who come online enjoy the listening to, and there's merit in that, there's value in that. This conversation was between yourself and me, and I would really like to appreciate the time that you spent. Do you have any last words for our listeners of Abaxoxi the Storytellers?
Thank you. I think my last word's very simple. If you ever believe you love yourself, make sure you prove it to yourself by telling yourself the truth over and over again until you believe it, because therein lies the power of personal narratives that are authentic, that are shareable. Because many a times we believe our own lies because society tells us that our truth is not valid. So may you validate your truth. May you tell it to yourself over and over again until you believe it.
Yo, that's my invitation from this week and this day onwards. It's permission to continue telling my story, to tell it authentically, to believe in my own story, to be the champion of my own story. And even if it's not validated, to validate it myself, to bring in the checks and balances that create the new measurement tool or rubric for assessing whether or not the story is working or not. And that's actually telling us that we've got agency to define the measurements and mechanisms of what is valid. Another conversation for another day. Thank you very much for joining us, Thabisile and myself, Rehema, on Abaxoxi the Storytellers. Until next time, thank you and good night.
Good night.
My love. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
I'm going to pause recording.